So Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 is a few days old at this point, and people are already wondering about the next game, Chapter 5. And the big cliffhanger for Chapter 4 was the reveal that Huggy from Chapter 1 is actually alive, meaning that he'll be one of the main villains in Chapter 5. But today I'm going to try to answer the question, what exactly will he do in Chapter 5, and what's the story with him? How is he alive? How could we defeat him in Chapter 5? But let's start off with what we actually saw in Chapter 4. So after we defeated Doey the Doughman, we met back up with Poppy and Kissy Missy, and then we got the big reveal that Ollie, the person that's been calling us on the phone for the past 2 games, is actually the prototype. And he gives a big speech to Poppy and telling her how it's time to come home.
Stop that.
You don't need to pretend anymore.
Poppy. You don't need to play at being stronger than you are.
You can
Come home.
How much do you know?
Everything.
Which is probably something that'll be explored in Chapter 5. And after she runs away in fear, it just leaves us and Kissy Missy. The prototype then says,
Some friend, huh?
Don't worry, I'll find her.
As for you two, try to land on your feet.
and he blows up the ground underneath us, with Kissy Missy grabbing onto us, trying to save us. But because she's already been badly injured from Chapter 3, her arm gets ripped off, and we fall a very long way down onto some rocks and boulders, which I'm not really sure how we survived this fall, but we somehow do, and we see Kissy Missy's arm next to us, and our final objective for Chapter 4 is just 3 question marks. And after we go to our final room of Chapter 4, it looks to be some kind of big garden area with tons of poppy flowers everywhere. And as we walk into the final room, we put in a VHS tape of Leith Pierre, and he says this.
Hi, my name is Leith Pierre, and I'm the head of innovation here at Playtime Co. If you're seeing this, you must be very, very lost. Well, rest assured, friend, our state-of-the-art laboratory is just up ahead. Why don't you just go on inside and tap one of our scientists on the shoulder? Tell them you're lost. They'll be glad to help. All right. Let's be honest. You're not supposed to be here. This is the single most high security, high clearance section of the whole factory. When someone finds you down here, you will be shot. And before you get any ideas, don't think you can just sneak away either. No, the second you put this tape in, it set off an alarm. So if anyone's home, they know exactly where you are. Pretty nifty, huh? Security is very important to us here. If I were you, I'd start running.
And then very unexpectedly, we see Huggy Wuggy in the distance. And I'm pretty sure at first he doesn't realize that it's us, the same person that threw him off a ledge in Chapter 1. But after he does realize that, he rushes at the door, banging on it and screaming at us, with the chapter ending there. But because of Huggy's return in Chapter 4, it's made a lot of people think that Chapter 5 is going to be the final game of Poppy Playtime. And one of the main reasons that people think this is because Mob Entertainment is trying to say that it ends how it started, with Huggy being the main boss in Chapter 1 and him coming back for the final chapter. But a while ago, Zach Bellinger, the CEO of Mob Entertainment, brought up Chapter 6, so plans could have changed, but this was only a couple months ago. Maybe originally they were going to try to stretch it out to 6 chapters, but they're shortening it down to 5. Or this confirms that Chapter 5 won't be the final chapter, because if we're using this logic, we could also say that Chapter 3 could have been the last chapter, because we did see Huggy in that chapter as well, but he was just a hallucination and he wasn't actually there. But anyways, what does Huggy's return mean for Chapter 5? Well, the first thing I want to talk about is how this might not even be Huggy, and he might not even be here at all. Because right when we see Huggy, the red smoke from Chapter 3 pops up, and we do know that in the Poppy Playtime series, if you breathe in the red smoke without a gas mask, you'll start seeing things. It happened in Chapter 3 twice, first making us see Huggy as a hallucination on a TV, and then him jumping out and starting to chase us. And it also happened at the end of the game with Catnap morphing into this demon version of himself. But the only problem with this is we don't see the red smoke until after Huggy shows up. And if this was another hallucination, wouldn't we just see him as the same thing we saw him as in Chapter 3? But we can obviously see that this one in Chapter 4 looks very beat up, so I don't think this is a hallucination. But now I'm going to answer the question, how is Huggy alive? Well, first there's the obvious answer, we never saw his body in Chapter 1, so Mob Entertainment never really closed his story and he could still be alive. Because with Mommy Longlegs and Catnap, we saw their bodies as they were dying, but Huggy Wuggy just fell really far down into some fog. And we did hear him scream at the end, meaning that he still was alive. And he does look hurt in Chapter 4, and he's limping a little bit. But if he can run at the door like that, that means he still is pretty strong and isn't paralyzed or anything like that. So how I think he's alive is that the prototype rebuilt him after Chapter 1. Now, if you saw my videos before Chapter 4 came out, I had a theory that Huggy was rebuilt as Doey, which obviously wasn't right. But I honestly don't think Huggy was rebuilt as anyone else except for himself. And one of the main reasons I thought this is because in a deleted Discord message, Zach Bellinger pretty much said that for the Poppy Playtime lore, Huggy Wuggy is Darth Vader, and the prototype is Palpatine. Now, I've never seen Star Wars, so I had to do a little bit of research, but apparently Palpatine saved Darth Vader after he fell into some fire. So it looks like the same thing happened here with Huggy. After he fell into that fog in Chapter 1, the prototype rebuilt him as what we see him as in Chapter 4. But now, what will he actually do to us in Chapter 5? In Chapter 4, it looks like Huggy wants to kill us really bad, him banging on the glass and screaming at us. So I think there's only one real way we could actually defeat him in Chapter 5, and it's by not actually killing him, but getting him to meet back up with Kissy Missy. These two obviously have some sort of relationship together, whether they're brother and sister or if they're boyfriend and girlfriend. But every time Poppy brings up that we killed Huggy in Chapter 1, Kissy Missy, if she's in the scene, looks really sad.
The doctor, Catnap, Mommy and Huggy, they're all dead. You have nothing now. We've all seen you, how capable you are. You killed Huggy. You killed Mommy. You freed me.
And I actually think the first scene of Chapter 5 will be Kissy Missy calming Huggy down before he can try to attack us. But then there's one problem with this theory, and it's that Kissy Missy may have died after Chapter 4. She was already beat up throughout the entire game, and at the very end, an explosion happened under her, and she lost an arm. So that may have actually been the end of her story as a character, and if it was, that would mean that the last thing she ever did was sacrifice herself for us, the player. And if she was alive in Chapter 5, that would mean that she's really on her last limb. She's missing one of her arms, a whole side of her face is burned, and we still don't officially know what happened to her at the end of Chapter 3. My guess is that it was just the prototype that attacked her, but I don't really see any other way we could get out of this situation that we were put in at the end of Chapter 4. Huggy Wuggy is literally a few inches away from us, only being separated by a door, and I feel like the only way that we could actually get out of this situation is Kissy Missy stopping him, and then maybe Huggy can turn into an ally, kind of like Doey the Doughman in Chapter 4, except Huggy won't just switch up and turn evil again at the end like Doey did. And I feel like Chapter 5 is going to be a big journey of us, Kissy, and Huggy all going to stop the prototype. And earlier when I was talking about that Zach Bellinger Discord message about Palpatine and Darth Vader and Star Wars and stuff, something I forgot to bring up is that Darth Vader is pretty much a slave to Palpatine, meaning that Huggy is a slave to the prototype. So it will be pretty hard, but I'm pretty sure that Kissy and us are going to convince Huggy that the prototype is not as good as he seems. Probably with some other monsters thrown in, because again, this might not even be the last chapter, but if it is, I think they'll just focus on the prototype and his lore and story. But right now, we know nothing about Poppy's role in Chapter 5, because the last time we saw her in Chapter 4, she abandoned us and Kissy because she heard on the phone that the prototype was going to come find her. And when the prototype says it's time to come home, I'm pretty sure he means that he's going to put her back in the case, the same case we saw her in Chapter 1. But then again, there's no actual way of knowing what's going to happen in Chapter 5 until the game comes out. So I hope you guys enjoyed my theory. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.